At 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night in November, a late shift engineer named Patrick Soto was the only person who heard it happen live. He wasn't even supposed to be listening. He was 3 rooms away in the transmission building of KRN-9, a small AM radio station that broadcast out to a rural stretch of farmland and 2 sleepy towns nobody outside the county had ever heard of. The overnight host, a woman named Carol Whitlock, was midway through her usual call-in segment. Soft music, late-night confessions, the kind of show that exists to keep lonely people company until sunrise. Patrick had the broadcast playing low on a speaker in the hallway, more out of habit than attention. Then the music stopped. Not faded, not transitioned. Stopped, mid-song, abruptly, the way a record skips when something physically interrupts it. For 6 full seconds, there was nothing. No song, no carol, no dead air tone. Just silence, broadcasting live out across 2 counties to anyone who happened to be listening. Then Carol's voice returned, but it wasn't her show voice anymore. It was lower, faster. She said 11 words that have been replayed, transcribed, and argued over for 19 years. "There's someone in the booth with me. I don't think." The broadcast cut to dead air. Patrick ran down the hallway. The studio door was locked from the inside, the way it always was during a live broadcast standard policy, so no one could accidentally walk in during a take. When station security finally forced it open 4 minutes later, the booth was empty. Carol Whitlock has not been seen since. This is the story of the only on-air disappearance in American radio history that has never been solved, and the 11 words that, almost 2 decades later, still don't have an explanation. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand who Carol Whitlock was and the strange, quiet importance she built for herself in a town most people couldn't find on a map. She was 44 years old, a former schoolteacher who'd taken the overnight radio shift almost as a joke, 8 years before she disappeared, after the previous host retired and nobody else wanted the hours. She built something nobody expected, a loyal, devoted late-night audience of insomniacs, long-haul truckers, and lonely farmhands who called in every night just to hear a familiar voice. She knew dozens of her regular callers by name. She remembered their stories, sick parents, failed marriages, kids who'd moved away. For a lot of people in that stretch of farmland, Carol Whitlock's voice at midnight was the closest thing to companionship they had, which makes the timing of what happened all the more disturbing, because in the weeks before her disappearance, several of her closest regular callers told police that Carol had seemed different, distracted. On 2 separate broadcasts, she mentioned, almost in passing, that she felt like someone had been watching the building at night. Neither comment was followed up on. Neither was taken seriously enough to be logged anywhere except in callers' memories, which investigators only collected after the fact, when it was already too late to matter. KRN-9's broadcast booth had exactly 1 door, 1 small reinforced window facing the hallway, and no other points of entry or exit. No second door. No drop ceiling large enough for a person to move through. No window to the outside at all. The booth was windowless by design, soundproofed on all 4 sides. When Patrick Soto and station security broke through the door 4 minutes after the broadcast cut to dead air, here is exactly what they found. Carol's headset, still plugged in, resting on the console exactly where she would have set it down. Her chair, pushed back from the desk at an angle, as if she'd stood up suddenly. Her purse, untouched, on the floor beside the chair. And on the studio glass, the small reinforced window facing the hallway, a single partial handprint, smudged, facing outward, as if someone inside the booth had pressed their palm against the glass. It did not match Carol Whitlock's hand. It was never definitively matched to anyone else, either. The print was lifted, photographed, and entered into evidence, and 20 years of advancing forensic technology has still never produced a match in any state or federal database. There was no other way in or out of that room. And yet, in the span of 4 minutes, between the moment the music stopped and the moment the door was forced open, Carol Whitlock had vanished from inside it, and someone else, it seems, had been there with her. KRN-9 recorded every broadcast onto reel-to-reel tape, a station policy that, in this case, became the single most important piece of evidence anyone would ever recover. The tape captured Carol's final 11 words clearly, but it also captured something underneath them, a detail that wasn't noticed until investigators sent the recording to a forensic audio lab months later. Beneath Carol's voice, in the 6 seconds of silence before she spoke, there's a second sound, faint, almost buried in the tape hiss. The lab's report described it, cautiously, as a low-frequency tonal pattern consistent with, but not conclusively identified as human vocalization. In plain language, there might be a second voice on that tape, speaking or breathing or humming just beneath the silence, in the moments right before Carol said someone was in the booth with her. No lab in 19 years has been able to definitively isolate or identify it. Audio enhancement technology has improved dramatically since that recording was made, and amateur audio analysts on the internet have produced dozens of competing cleaned-up versions over the years, several of which claim to reveal entirely different things. A name, a word, even according to one widely circulated but never verified version, the sound of a second person breathing heavily near the microphone. None of these amateur versions have ever been authenticated, but the original lab reports careful, hedged language, consistent with, but not conclusively identified as, is on its own enough to keep this detail alive in true crime circles to this day. Every night, Carol's show took calls from a rotating cast of regulars, and in the aftermath of her disappearance, investigators quickly discovered that almost everyone in her on-air orbit had some reason to be looked at twice. Daryl Hutchins, a long-haul trucker and one of Carol's most frequent callers, had phoned into the show that very night, just 20 minutes before the disappearance, and according to the station's own caller log, had asked Carol an unusual question on air: whether she ever felt unsafe being alone in the building at night. Carol had laughed it off. Daryl's truck was confirmed, via fuel receipts and way station records, to be over 200 miles away by the time of the disappearance, an alibi investigators eventually accepted, though not before years of online speculation refused to let him go. Marjorie Teague, the station's general manager, had been the one person with a master key to every door in the building, including the booth itself. She told police she'd left the station at 9 p.m., hours before the incident, a claim corroborated by her husband, though by no one outside her own household. She retired from radio entirely within a year and has declined every interview request since, a silence some have read as brief and others have read as something else. Patrick Soto, the engineer who heard it happen, has remained, for almost 2 decades, the person investigators have never been able to fully clear or fully suspect. He was alone in the building, except for Carol. He had the fastest possible access to the booth, and yet nothing, no physical evidence, no inconsistency in his account across 19 years of repeated interviews has ever pointed to his involvement. He still lives in the same small town. He has spoken about that night exactly twice publicly in 19 years, and both times by his own admission. He relives the 6 seconds of silence every single day. This case has produced, perhaps more than any other in this series, a wide and strange field of competing theories because almost nothing about it behaves the way disappearances usually do. Theory 1. The intruder. Someone entered the booth in the narrow window of time when the door's lock mechanism, an older model, prone to occasional failure, according to maintenance records uncovered years later, briefly malfunctioned. This theory accounts for the handprint and the second voice on the tape, but cannot explain how Carol vanished from a windowless room in under 4 minutes without anyone in the hallway seeing a single thing. Theory 2. Carol left willingly. A small but persistent theory holds that Carol staged her own disappearance, that the words on the tape were a kind of message, deliberately cryptic to someone specific, and that she walked out under her own power through a brief window when the hallway was unwatched. Proponents point to her comments about being watched as evidence she may have been preparing an exit. Critics point out this theory still requires explaining the unidentified handprint and voice, evidence that doesn't fit a simple solo departure. Theory 3. Something already inside. The theory that unsettles people the most, repeated often enough in true crime communities, that it's developed its own informal name. The third occupant holds that someone was already in that booth before the broadcast began that night, hidden somewhere investigators never thought to search in the chaotic hours after the disappearance, and that Carol's final words weren't a warning about an intruder, but a discovery. No version of this theory has ever been substantiated, but nearly 2 decades later, it remains the explanation most frequently cited by people who've spent serious time with this case, not because there's hard evidence behind it, but because, of every theory on the table, it's the only one that fits every single detail without requiring something physically impossible to also be true. KRN-9 went off the air for a good 6 years after Carol's disappearance, unable to recover financially from a story that ironically made the small station briefly morbidly famous. The building still stands mostly vacant, at the edge of a county that has never stopped half expecting Carol Whitlock to walk back into it. Patrick Soto still keeps a copy of the original broadcast tape, not the cleaned up internet versions, but a direct copy of the original reel, which he has never publicly shared in full. He said, in both of his rare interviews, that he listens to those 6 seconds of silence sometimes late at night, the same way Carol's old listeners used to tune in just to hear a familiar voice keep them company in the dark. He says he's still listening for her to come back. The case remains open with the county sheriff's department, though it has not had an active lead in over a decade. Periodically, new audio forensic techniques are applied to that original tape, hoping to finally pull something clear and identifiable out from underneath the silence. So far, nothing has changed. Somewhere on a reel of magnetic tape sitting in an evidence locker, 6 seconds of silence still hold whatever the truth of that night actually was. A truth that a single locked door, a single unmatched handprint, and 11 unfinished words have kept just out of reach for 19 years. There's someone in the booth with me. I don't think. Carol Whitlock never finished that sentence. To this day, no one else has been able to finish it for her. What do you think those 6 seconds of silence really hold? Was someone already in that booth, or did Carol Whitlock disappear by choice? Tell me your theory in the comments below. If stories like this one keep you hooked the way they keep me up writing them, subscribe, and I'll bring you the next unsolved case very soon.